After 40 years of loyalty, the Alpha King rejected her. Then she found what he left behind. Her name was Elara. She was 62 years old. Her hair had gone silver somewhere around her 50s, and she had never bothered to hide it. She had spent too many years pretending things were fine, to waste any more energy on appearances. For 40 years, she had stood beside the Alpha King of Ironmore Pack. Not in front of him. Never that. Not as an equal. Not as a queen. Not even as a woman who was truly seen. She stood beside him the way a shadow stands beside a person. Always there. Never noticed until she was gone. And then one evening in the great stone hall of the Ironmore Palace, in front of every wolf in the kingdom, he made her gone. The ceremony had started like any other pack gathering. Torches burned along the walls. The elders sat in their carved seats. The younger wolves stood in rows behind them, quiet and respectful. Elara had attended hundreds of these nights. She knew where to stand, when to bow her head, when to be invisible. She had become very good at being invisible. Alpha King Aldrich walked to the center of the hall. He was a tall man, broad-shouldered, silver-haired at the temples. At 68, he still looked like someone you did not want to argue with. His face was unreadable, as it always was. Elara had spent 40 years trying to read that face, and she still was not sure she ever got it right. He raised one hand, and the hall went silent immediately. Then he spoke. Elara Voss. His voice was steady, not cruel, not warm, just steady, like a man reading a document. You are hereby released from your bond to this pack and to me. You are no longer my Luna, you are free to go. The silence that followed was the loudest thing Elara had ever heard. She stood still for a moment. Just one moment. She felt every pair of eyes in that hall land on her at once. Some with shock, some with pity, some with the kind of quiet satisfaction that people try to hide but never quite manage to. She did not cry. She did not ask why. She did not beg. She straightened her back, lifted her chin, the way her mother had always told her to, and she walked out of that hall without looking at a single person. Not the elders, not the guards, not Aldrich. She did not look back. People who have never lost something they gave their whole life to might think that what happened next would be falling apart, crying for weeks, not eating, staring at walls. Elara did some of that. She would not pretend otherwise. There were nights in her small woodland cottage, the one her mother had left her, the one thing she had never given over to Aldrich or the pack, where she sat at the kitchen table with cold tea and just let the silence sit on top of her like a weight. But mostly she was tired. She had spent 4 decades running a household that was never officially hers, raising Aldrich's children from his first mate, who had passed when the children were very young, organizing pack ceremonies, sitting through territory negotiations, nursing Aldrich through a silver poisoning that nearly killed him when he was 51, staying awake for 3 nights straight by his bedside until his color came back. She had done all of it without a title, without formal recognition, without him ever once saying, in front of the pack, that she was his. She had told herself for years that it did not matter, that love did not need a label, that her presence was proof enough of what they were to each other. Now she sat in her little cottage and she understood, slowly and painfully, that she had been telling herself a comfortable lie for a very long time. The garden helped. She planted things in the spring, tomatoes, lavender, some herbs she had always wanted to grow but never had time for. She slept past sunrise for the first time in decades. She read books she had been meaning to read since her 30s. She learned that she liked mornings when they belonged only to her. She was not happy. But she was starting to remember who she was before she became someone's shadow. 6 months passed. She was pulling weeds from the garden on a Tuesday morning when she heard the sound of footsteps on the gravel path. She did not need to look up to know who it was. She recognized the walk. It was Soren, Aldrich's beta, his most trusted man, the one who had stood at the side of the hall the night of the rejection and had not been able to meet her eyes. He looked worse than she had ever seen him, thin, pale, like a man who had not been sleeping. "Elara," he said. His voice was rough. She set down her garden tool and stood up slowly. She looked at him, and she already knew, in the way that people sometimes know things before they are told, that whatever he had come to say was going to change something. "He's gone," Soren said. "Aldrich passed away 3 days ago." She heard the words, she understood them, but it took a moment for them to actually arrive somewhere inside her. How long was he sick? She asked. Her voice was very quiet. Soren looked at the ground. 3 years. 3 years. 3 years, and she had not known. 3 years of watching him become quieter, more distant, of noticing the medical visitors arriving late at night, of feeling something shift between them without being able to name it. She had assumed it was another woman. She had assumed he had grown tired of her. She had assumed all the wrong things. He had a bloodline condition, Soren said. It moves fast once it starts. There is no treatment. He knew from the beginning how it would end. And the rejection? Ilara asked. Soren finally looked up at her. His eyes were red. He could not bear the idea of you watching him die. He said you had already spent too many years carrying other people's weight. He didn't want to be one more thing you had to carry. He stopped, swallowed. He thought he was setting you free. Ilara stood very still in her garden. The morning was quiet around her. A bird was singing somewhere in the trees. The lavender smelled strong and sweet in the warm air. She did not say anything for a long time. Then Soren reached into his coat and brought out a sealed envelope. Her name was written on the front in Aldrich's handwriting, the same careful, slightly slanted letters she had seen on pact documents for 40 years. Below her name, in smaller writing, were these words: "Open this only when you are ready to be angry at me." She could not open it. Not that day. Not the next. She put it on her kitchen table, and she went back to her garden, and she cried for the first time since the night of the rejection. Not politely, not quietly. The kind of crying that comes from somewhere deep and old, the kind that has been waiting. She cried for the man she had loved. She cried for the 40 years. She cried for the lie she had told herself, and for the truth she had never been given. She cried because she was furious at him for making this decision without her, and she cried because somewhere beneath the fury she understood why he did it, and understanding it did not make it hurt any less. A week later she drove back to Ironmore, not to reclaim anything, just to understand. The pack received her the way people receive someone they have wronged, without knowing how to apologize. The older kitchen staff came to hug her. The guards who had known her for decades stood a little straighter when she walked past, as if trying to show her some respect they should have shown years ago. Even the younger wolves, who had perhaps expected something colder from the woman who had been publicly rejected, were gentle with her. And then she met Nadia, the young she-wolf who the pack had believed Aldrich had chosen over Ilara. Nadia was shaking when she sat down across from Ilara in the small receiving room. She was maybe 30 years old, nervous, and obviously carrying guilt she had not asked for. "He never chose me," Nadia said, before Ilara could say anything. "I want you to know that. He never looked at me the way people implied. He asked me to attend events with him, to be visible. I did not know at first what it was for, and by the time I understood, I was already part of the lie, and I did not know how to undo it." She looked at her hands. "I am so sorry. I know that means very little." Ilara looked at her for a long moment. Then she said, "It means something." She walked through Aldrich's private chambers that afternoon, alone. For the first time in their 40 years together, she moved through those rooms without him in them. She looked at the desk where he had written so many letters, the chair by the window where he had sat in the mornings, the small framed photograph of his children as young ones, which she had been there for. And then she found what he had left behind. On the desk, in a careful stack, were 3 thick journals. Every page was addressed to her. 3 years of letters he had written to her, while she was still in the same house, still sleeping down the hall, still believing she was losing him to someone else. Beneath the journals was a painting. A proper oil painting, framed in dark wood. It was her. She was perhaps 30 years old in the painting, caught mid-laugh at something just off to the side. She looked completely unguarded. She looked like someone who had not yet learned to make herself invisible. She did not know when he had commissioned it. She did not know who had sat with him to describe her that way. And beneath the painting was a legal document. The northern woodland territory of Ironmore, 400 acres of old forest and riverland, transferred permanently and irrevocably into her name. At the very bottom of the stack was a small cloth pouch. Inside it was the mating bond pendant he had given her in the first year of their life together, the one she had quietly stopped wearing somewhere in her 40s, because it felt like claiming something she had never officially been given. Wrapped around the pendant was a single folded note. She opened it slowly. It said, "I could not keep you safe from grief, and also keep you. So I chose to keep you safe. I know that was not my choice to make alone. I know you will be angry. You are allowed to be angry. I was not brave enough to say goodbye to your face, because I have never been brave when it came to you. Only stubborn and proud and afraid. The land is yours. It has always been yours in the only way I knew how to give things. Quietly. And too late. Forgive me if you can. Live even if you cannot." She read the journals. All of them. Every page. She read about 3 years of a man watching himself disappear, and writing to the one person he could not bring himself to say any of it to out loud. She read about his fear, about his pride getting in the way of his love, the way it always had. She read about nights where he described the sound of her moving through the house, and said it was the only thing that still felt like home. She read about a man who spent his final chapter writing letters to someone he had deliberately sent away. It took her 2 weeks to finish them. When she was done, she sat for a long time with both things true at once inside her chest. He had loved her, deeply and completely, and for a very long time, in the only way he knew how, which was quietly and imperfectly, and without ever quite saying it directly. That was real, and he had still made the decision for her. He had still decided, on his own, without asking, that she could not handle the truth. He had still chosen to protect her in a way that looked, from the outside and from the inside, exactly like abandonment. That was also real. She did not have to choose which one mattered more. She did not have to forgive him completely to carry the love forward, and she did not have to dismiss the love to stay angry about the choice. She could hold both. She was 62 years old, and she had learned, finally, that holding two difficult things at once was not weakness. It was just what life actually looked like. The Pack Council sent a formal message 2 weeks later. They offered her the title of Honored Luna, a posthumous recognition of her 40 years of service. A gesture, a way of saying, "We should have said this while it counted, but please accept it now." She wrote back a very polite, very firm letter declining the title. She accepted the land. On a morning in early autumn, she drove out to the northern woodland, her woodland now, 400 acres of old trees and quiet river and morning mist. She walked in from the road and kept walking until the sounds of the outside world faded, and there was only the wind and the birds and the soft sound of the river somewhere through the trees. She put her hand against the bark of an old oak tree, and she stood there for a while. She thought about 40 years. She thought about what it costs a person to be devoted without being seen. She thought about the portrait, the one of her laughing at 30, caught unguarded, before she had learned to make herself small. She thought about how he had looked at her long enough to commission that painting, and had still never once told her, in plain words, what she meant to him. She thought about how love, even real love, can be clumsy and selfish and wrong, and how that does not make it less real. It just makes it human. She put the pendant around her neck. Not because she had forgiven everything. Not because the last 40 years were now suddenly simple or clean. She put it on because it was hers, and she was done leaving things behind that belonged to her. She had shaped herself around his life, his children, his pack, his needs. She had made herself smaller and quieter and more invisible every year, and she had called it love, and parts of it were love, but parts of it were also just disappearing slowly. She was not going to disappear anymore. She stood in her woodland in the early autumn morning, 62 years old, with silver hair and a pendant around her neck, and 400 acres of old trees behind her. And for the first time, in longer than she could remember, she felt like herself. Not someone's Luna, not someone's shadow, not someone's quiet sacrifice. Just Ilara. And that, after everything, was enough.